jump scare! Just kidding. If you've seen It Chapter 2, then you're probably tired of being scared out of your seat every few minutes. But now that your adrenaline levels are back to normal, let's talk about some of the questions we still have after the movie. Even though the film was nearly 3 hours long, there are still many unanswered questions we have about It Chapter 2. But in the movie's defense, the book is also obscenely long, and there's a lot to pack in. We'll talk about the questions still lingering in our minds and which one of Stephen King's favorite moments didn't make it into the final film. Deadlights. Stephen King is good at a lot of things, but brevity definitely isn't one of his strong suits. Not that we're complaining. The novel It is incredibly long, but director Andy Muschietti says he wasn't worried about setting up the second movie while working on the first. Well, mostly. It turns out there was one major moment he had future plans for, and that's the scene in which Beverly encounters the Deadlights at the end of Chapter 1. She sees them when Pennywise unhinges his jaw to show off his true form, and it has quite the effect on Bev, although she definitely fares better than Henry Bowers does in the book. Seeing the Deadlights causes his hair to turn as stark white as Doc Brown's, and also for him to go totally insane. But apparently when Beverly stared down the Deadlights in the previous film, they gave her a helpful hint for the future. Isn't that nice of them? Beverly explains that because she saw the Deadlights, she knows the losers have to defeat Pennywise before they leave Derry, if they want to survive. Only, what? It's crazy enough that Bev even survived coming face to face with this horrifying extra-dimensional whatever they are, but to think it gave a warning to help her stay alive and essentially ensure its own destruction is just kinda crazy. Well, crazier than an extra-dimensional being taking the form of a dancing clown. Derry. The first movie made it pretty clear that despite its idyllic charm, Derry isn't a particularly nice place to live. At least not when Pennywise is on the prowl. It's established that being in Derry basically makes people worse than they would have been if they lived elsewhere, but the second movie left us wondering, how much worse? Would Eddie's mother have been quite as crazy and overbearing if she hadn't lived in Derry? What about Beverly's dad, who's so creepy and abusive, we'd frankly rather not talk about the guy. In Chapter 2, we see the losers as adults, almost all of whom have moved away from their hometown, only they didn't really do a great job of escaping it. Bev is married to an abusive jerk just like her dad, and Eddie is married to a woman just like his mother. The same actress, Molly Atkinson, even plays both roles. Was the evil force concentrated around Derry really the reason so many characters are so awful? Or is it possible humans are just kind of the worst without influence from any extra-dimensional entities? Frankly, the truth probably lies somewhere in the middle, but it's definitely something we would have liked to see clarified in the movie. Bridge scene. We could go on and on all day comparing the two It movies of the 1990 miniseries, but let's just skip ahead and agree that they both have their merits. But the miniseries was missing one crucial and heartbreaking scene from the books that we got to see in Chapter 2. It's a scene involving a hate crime perpetrated against a man named Adrian Mellon who is thrown off a bridge where he falls into the clutches of Pennywise. If you thought it was tough to watch the movie, you should know it's even more tragic in the books, and doubly so when you realize it's based on an actual event perpetuated in 1984 against a man named Charlie Howard. But we're not telling you all this to bum you out. We have a question regarding the bridge scene from Chapter 2. There's a lot of scary stuff that happens in the movie, and usually it seems like the losers are either protected by plot armor or safely existing in flashbacks. But would it not have been sweet to see some revenge on the human monsters who perpetrated this terrible crime? Why couldn't we have seen that instead of that oh so important Paul Bunyan scene? Paul Bunyan. We aren't going to pretend to understand the brilliant mind of Stephen King, but we are going to make an indisputable statement. He's really into Paul Bunyan. Yeah, that Paul Bunyan with the big old blue ox. It turns out that in the non-fictional town of Bangor, Maine, there's actually a giant fiberglass statue of the guy that's been there since 1959. There's a scene in the book in which a Paul Bunyan statue comes to life and chases Richie around, and King really wanted that to make it into the movie. Director Andy Muschietti, this was an easy thing to include, but King's next request? Not so much. At the end of the book, there's a scene in which Derry collapses into a sinkhole and floods, and a standpipe falls and rolls down a hill. Apparently, it's one of King's top 10 favorite It moments, and he really wanted that in the movie. But Muschietti cited the CGI budget and the emotional tone of the movie for why this wasn't included. But for a movie which contained so many superfluous scenes and has an almost 3-hour-long runtime, why couldn't they have included this scene? Growing up. Casting a movie is never easy, but it's even harder when you have to find actors who could conceivably be the grown-up versions of a group of kids. But this is something that was definitely taken seriously here. Jay Ryan even had to submit childhood photos so they could be compared to Jeremy Ray Taylor. Apparently, Wyatt Oleff was the only child actor displeased with the adult version of himself. He told Andy Bean that he had been hoping to be portrayed by Joseph Gordon-Levitt instead. Hey, join the club, kid. But honestly, it's going to be interesting to see what the cast of Chapter 1 looks like in a few years. They're growing up so fast they already had to digitally de-age the kids for Chapter 2. Jack Dylan Grazer's voice already changed so much from the first movie that they seriously considered bringing in a voice actor for him. Finn Wolfhard had the most de-aging done, and Sophia Lillis had the least. We'll just have to wait and see how closely these kids end up resembling their adult counterparts once they grow up. Movie posters. Here's another entry on the list of reasons we can't have nice things. Or rather, why we can't have things as terrifying as we'd like them. We all know It Chapter 2 isn't suitable for kids, but some parents are even upset by the posters for the movie. Parents in Brisbane, Australia have even filed complaints with ad standards over posters for the film, which obviously depict Bill Skarsgård as Pennywise the Dancing Clown. Hey, we thought kids liked clowns. In Australia, the film has a rating of MA15+, which means it's recommended for kids 15 years or older. These parents want not just It Chapter 2, but all MA15+ movies not to advertise in areas where children might visit. Although ad standards claim the posters will stay up for now, this could impact the way future movies are allowed to advertise in Australia. If there is a continuation of the It storyline, could this controversy limit the types of advertising the studio can put out? More lore. Did we mention that the novel It is extremely long? Because it is. We're not complaining because there's a ton of great stuff in it, just stating facts. In fact, there's so much awesome stuff that we can't help but wonder if there will ever be a third movie based on It. Yeah, we know the story of the Losers Club is pretty wrapped up, but what about the lore and world building? There is so much of it in the books and Stephen King's work in general that the two movies barely even touched on it. Even director Andy Muschietti acknowledged that there is a lot of It lore still out there, and says it's exciting to think about eventually exploring this mythology. Of course, he clarified that he has nothing substantial to share about future projects at the moment, but that doesn't mean it won't happen. In fact, the possibilities for continuations of the world of It are pretty limitless. Even if it doesn't make it back to the big screen, who's to say it couldn't be a show? Just think about how similar the worlds of It and Stranger Things are if you think about it. Flashbacks. No movie's perfect, and one could argue that It Chapter 2 struggled a bit with its pacing. It was short on the crazy epic world building, yet seemed to have time for flashback after flashback. Maybe if they didn't have to spend so much time and effort de-aging all the kids, they could have afforded to have Stephen King's favorite scene in the movie. We're just saying. Flashbacks aren't always a bad thing by any means, but they're pretty low stakes in a movie that's supposed to keep your heart pounding. After all, you know the kids are going to survive since you've already seen them as adults. Did they think people were going to skip Chapter 1 and go right to Chapter 2, or were they just trying to run out the clock with this excessive amount of flashbacks? One common criticism of the first movie is that it relied too heavily on jump scares, and this is something which continued on in Chapter 2. We want high-stakes world-building madness, so why do we waste so much time in the past instead of the horrifying present? Pennywise. Even if you've read the book, the answer to what is Pennywise is pretty darn confusing, or at least it's quite hard to explain. The movies make it clear that he isn't really a dancing clown, although that's hardly comforting to the citizens of Derry. It's an ancient, shape-shifting monster known as a glamour in the book, and he's unimaginably old. While it's been on Earth for quite some time, it's been in the Macroverse even longer. We're talking billions of years. But in the movies, well, the Losers Club dispelled Pennywise in Chapter 1, and the crime against Adrian inspired him to return, but other than that, it's never really clarified whether Pennywise is just a horrifying nightmare alien creature or whether his existence is tied into the main characters or the town of Derry as a whole. Is he a manifestation of the loser's internal fears? Is he just as scary on his own? Or is he a combination of nightmare fuel and the nightmares that fuel him? Although you could argue for the various answers, the question largely remains unanswered, even at the conclusion of it, Chapter 2. Cursed. Whether you think the movie version of Pennywise is just a super powerful nightmare alien, or whether you think he's a manifestation of the fears of children, we can all agree that he's one spooky clown. But could It Chapter 2 spark another invasion of clowns? Yeah, we're talking about in the real world and not just in movies, and yes, we mean another invasion of clowns. In case you blocked it out, a few years back there were reports of clowns. Clowns everywhere. In 2016, New Line Cinema announced that they would be releasing It Chapter 1 in 2017. And that same year, people started seeing clowns. Started seeing them, well, clowning around. One woman in Greenville, South Carolina claimed her son saw clowns in the woods whispering and making strange noises, which definitely isn't terrifying. A man in Kentucky was arrested for dressing as a clown and lurking in the woods. And calls flooded in from all over the United States that people were seeing clowns in unusual places. Well, to be fair, there are very few places it's not surprising to see a clown. And after It Chapter 2 was announced, a woman in New Jersey found a homemade Pennywise doll in her yard, with no idea where it came from. She did the only reasonable thing by burning that terrifying doll, but now that the movie's out, is it possible the clowns are coming back? We have to admit, even after sitting through almost 3 hours of It Chapter 2, we still want more. So much so that we hope the answer to will there be a third movie is a resounding yes. What questions are still plaguing your mind? Share them with us in the comment section below, and then click on that subscribe button for more videos from us here at CBR. Bye for now.